Hello and welcome to Scale Car Garage. Well, there's a car I've always wanted to make a model racing car out of. Don't want to give away too much, but you can buy one ready-made, but there were some great bodies of this car made in the 1960s, not to mention the 2000s as well, but I digress. I'll tell you what, let's go through a little history of the car, and then I'll take you around the workbench here and show you what I have in mind to build. Anyway, enough of my yakking. Thanks for hanging out here at Scale Car Garage.
Eric Broadley was the man who designed, built, and marketed his cars using the company he founded, Lola Cars International. Mr. Broadley's first design was a front-engined road racing car he had built in 1957, which was quite successful. This success led to the founding of his company in Huntington, England in 1958. By 1963, his Lola Mark VI, also known as the Lola GT, was raced at Le Mans, and the Ford Motor Company took notice. Impressed with the design, Ford engaged Lola Cars to develop the Lola Mark VI into a car to race at Le Mans under the Ford brand. After 2 years of work, Mr. Broadley requested and gained his release from his contract with Ford, which allowed Lola Cars to begin to develop their own cars again. An interesting footnote is that Ford and Carroll Shelby took the Lola Mark VI and developed it into what was eventually to be the Ford GT40. Now free to build his own designs, Eric Broadley released his Type 70, or T70. Joining forces with John Surtees to form Lola Racing Limited as a works or factory racing and development division, the T70 developed into a formidable racing car. The T70 had a monocoque structure made of welded and riveted sheet metal. It was also designed to accept any American stock engine. 1965 saw the car raced in the UK as well as the US with great success. An unfortunate accident in practice at Mosport sidelined John Surtees with some very serious injuries, from which he recovered in time to race the T70 in a brand new series created in 1966 under the Group 7 category of the FIA, called the Canadian American Challenge Cup, or Can-Am as it became to be known. The Lola T70 was the car to have, as it took John Surtees to the Can-Am Championship in its inaugural season and was a very popular customer car throughout the history of the series. With its very attractive body design and championship-winning ways, the Lola T70 is a wonderful subject for model car racing.
What a wonderful looking car, and an iconic race car. And a car that was modeled by a few companies, of course, in the 1960s, in both 1/24th and 1/32nd scale. I do have some examples in 1/32nd scale that I'm going to show you now. This is the original issue from 1966 by Aurora. Aurora's 1/32nd scale, pardon me for putting my glasses on, 1/32nd scale Lola T70. And oh my gosh, this was actually the US version of the model. You can tell because it says Aurora Plastics Corporation, West Hampstead, New York. Very cool. And I purchased it, I mean, not only for the box, but just look at that artwork. Isn't that beautiful? It's lovely. I mean, it's a display piece itself. The box is a display piece. But inside the box is the car. And I was so excited. And I looked, and it's kind of all there, but it looks like it was built in 1966 by someone who was quite young in 1966. As you can see, there's quite a bit of well, let's be kind and call it extra glue on the car. I'm sure those fingerprints could tell me exactly who built it. It is all there. It would take a lot of work to get this car to a point where it would be pristine again. I have to say though, it must have been someone who was young, because even with the blemishes of extra cement, they still put the decals on. So, you know, that in itself is charming. I think it's lovely. But this version of the car is just well, lovely, but gonna need a lot of work. So, not to be outdone, and I'm sure you've seen this box in passing with other episodes. Yes, this is the reissue 1/32nd scale Lola T70 by Aurora. Now this actually was manufactured in Canada, and there are two ways to actually determine if an Aurora kit was made in Canada. The first way is it says made in Canada. Thank you, I know, I'm Captain Obvious. The other way is, of course, French on the box. So I think that kind of is the tell. But this is a pristine, unbuilt version. Beautiful box. Let's set that aside. So let's open this up, and you can see the parts, etc. It also came with some Aurora figures as well, which I'll put to the side, which was an added bonus. But there is an unbuilt Aurora 1/32nd scale Lola T70. And it is lovely, absolutely lovely. Wow. Now, Aurora wasn't the only company who built, or manufactured, I should say, a 1/32nd scale version of this car. There were other companies, and I'm sure they'd be familiar to you. So let's put this body over here, so that we have it, and compare it to the other manufacturers of 1/32nd scale Lola T70s that I happen to have. I don't have all of them, but I have some of them. So, all right, this is Aurora's lovely version. There was actually a company called Palmer Plastics. If you really want to, I'll put a link in the description to a YouTube channel called Max Models, and Max is an expert at the histories of these wonderful plastic model companies that gave us so much joy as youngsters. He has done extensive research, and he's a really nice guy. So if you could go visit him, if you want to find out more about Aurora, Palmer, Monogram, Revell, that's the go-to YouTube channel for that type of history. So shout out to Max, does a great job. Palmer. Here's Palmer's version of the Lola T70. Now, I did assemble this and paint it thinking I was going to do a version of the Lola T70, and I kind of, well, stopped. I do have the other parts, but I thought, well, looks like a Lola T70, but it looks rather small to me. And herein lies the challenge of this first attempt at building these T70s. If you look beside the Aurora model, it's similar, they're pretty close. The Aurora is longer. They both look quite good. And bear in mind that the Lola T70 did go through a few versions, and they were a customer car, so a lot of customers would do things to them. The other manufacturer was Monogram, and it was actually one of Monogram's last 1/32nd scale cars, the Lola T70. This one I have, I do have the card underneath as well, so it finishes off the inlets here for the engine. And the glass, which needs a wee bit of repair, and we'll get to that. But for the first go round, let's take a look. And you put it beside it's not the Palmer. It looks much wider, much longer than the Palmer. About the same length as the Aurora, but certainly wider than both of these cars. Interesting. Okay. Then Monogram, thank goodness, made essentially a new slot car for us enthusiasts, and made a model racing car of the Lola T70 in John Surtees livery, and it is lovely. Oh my gosh, I mean, how can you not love this car? Yeah, full driver and interior, a sidewinder configuration, and oh, it goes very, very well. Of course, I took the magnet out, but it still does very well. The tires are actually quite good. However, placed beside these vintage bodies, I'm afraid it's even a wee bit wider than, or looks to be a wee bit wider than, the 1960s version of Monogram's Lola T70. So I'm afraid I had to pull out my spreadsheet program, put in some numbers, and just see how these all fare. And I did just that. Starting with the actual car itself. So I got the dimensions for the Lola T70 Mark II, which is essentially these cars. And luckily it was in centimeters, and forgive me, I'm going to use the metric system. Force of habit. So I took the wheelbase, front track, rear track, body width, and body length of the actual car, and simply divided by 32. Now, here is a big asterisk and caveat here. When modelers are making scale models, you know, all of the dimensions aren't exact. They can't be, because you get close and then some things have to be tweaked to make the car look like the actual car. Not everything translates perfectly once reduced to a certain scale. So bearing that in mind, we have to think about there has to be some leeway from a measurement perspective. All right, caveat stated. So we've taken those measurements, divided by 32, and then measured each of these cars, including Monogram's, I don't want to call it a reshoot. I want to call it it's essentially a new model. I mean, when you look at what they did in the 60s versus what they did in the 2000s, it's totally new. So let's treat it as such. Okay, so taking the wheelbase, front track, rear track, body width, and body length of each of these models, you can see a percent variance. So let's go through that, shall we? All right. So for the Monogram's 1960s Lola T70 Mark II version, when it comes to the wheelbase should be, if you're calculating 1/32 scale, 7.54 centimeters. The actual wheelbase of the 1960s car, 7.4. So it's a variance of about 1.9%. Not bad. When you look at the front track, the calculated front track should be, in 1/32 scale, 4.6 centimeters. The actual front track of the Monogram's 1960s car is 5.35, which is a variance of 16%. Okay. Rear track should be the same as the front track, so we have the same 16% variance. The body width should be 5.47. Actuality is 5.8, which is a variance of 5.9%. And the body length should be 12.38 or 12.4 centimeters. It is actually 12.85, and that's a variance of 3.78%. So I know this may not be perfectly scientific, but I took all the variance numbers and averaged them. So the Monogram 1960s Lola T70 has an average variance of 8.05%. Now, just before we continue, which car do you think has the lowest variance percentage overall? Okay, let's find out. The Monogram from the 2000s, which is the John Surtees, beautiful car, John Surtees version. Again, the wheelbase is bang on, 7.5. Very small variance, that's close to 0.5%. The front track, which should be 4.6, is 5.8. It's 26%, a 26% variance, as for the rear track as well. The body width should be 5.4. It's 6.15, which is a variance of 12.29% or 12.3%. The body length should be 12.3. It's actually 13.3, which is a variance of 7.41%, giving an overall variance, and I said it's just an average of the other variances, of 14.23%. So we've gone from 8.05 from the 1960s to 14.23% overall in the 2000s. All right. Palmer. As I said, check out Max Model's YouTube channel to learn more about Palmer specifically as a plastics company. Here's what's interesting. Here is the Palmer model, and it looks tiny. So you think. However, tail of the tape. Let's see. Wheelbase should be 7.54. It's actually 7.3. It is minus 3.19% variance. It's smaller than it should be. All right, let's keep going here. Front and rear track should be 4.6 centimeters. It's actually 4.65. Basically bang on. Less than one. Well, it's about 1%. My goodness. The body width should be 5.4. It's actually 5.1. It's actually narrower than it should be by almost 7%, 6.88%. And the body length, which should be 12.38, is 12.13 minus 2% variance. Overall, it has a minus 2% variance. Wow, that I did not expect. Now, let's look at our 1960s Aurora body. Lovely as it is. Tail of the tape. The wheelbase should be 7.5. It's 8 centimeters, which is a positive variance of 6%. The front track should be 4.6 and the rear track 4.6. It's actually 5.15, which is a variance of 11.88%. Still less than the monograms, but certainly closer than the Palmer. The body width should be 5.47. It's 5.4. It's a little less than it should be, so that's a variance of minus 1%. The length, however, 12.38 is the calculated length. The actual length is 13 centimeters. So it's actually the longest of all of the Lola T70s we're looking at, and it has the largest variance for length of 8.22%. However, overall, it has a variance of 7.33%. So, in rank order, we have, if you go by the numbers, the Palmer might be the most accurate of all four. That surprised me. Followed by the Aurora Lola T70, the 1960s version of Monogram's Lola T70, and lastly the 2000 version of the Lola T70. So here is the conundrum. Which car to build? I've kind of started along on the Palmer, so the Palmer's actually a fairly good candidate. We can continue with that. We don't just have to build one. So there we go. And it's already painted red. Far along. Continue. So let's say we'll put the Palmer on the track. The decision is between the Monogram Lola T70 from the 60s and the Aurora Lola T70 from the 60s. Both lovely models. Or do we do both? A fleet of Lola T70s. Herein lies something to contemplate.
I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe.